my name is Ashley, and this here is Oakley, and today we're going to be teaching you all about the CHA way of tying your horse.
Howdy, and welcome to the Bar SC Ranch, where you will experience our journey of running a family business, caring for animals, and doing life together. Subscribe now and be inspired here at the Bar SC.
So the first thing I'm going to tell you guys about is when we're actually going to need to tie our horses up. And the main time that we're going to need our horses tied are when we're saddling or grooming. When we're saddling and grooming and working in close proximity with our horse, we're going to tend to have them tied a little bit closer to the wall. That's all right. We're going to go over the lengths of tying in just a moment here. If you're just tying your horse up because you need them to stand there for a little while while you clean their pen or something like that, they can be tied a little bit looser. But as we leave our horses tied, there's three main things that we want to consider. One is that our halter is fitting them appropriately and not causing any problems. Two is that we tie them the correct distance from the wall. And three is that we use a safe, quick release knot when we're tying up our horse. So when we're talking about halter fit, and we have a video on that, you can go back and watch that if you'd like to learn all about haltering and halter fit for your horses. We want to make sure it's snug enough and secure in a properly fitting halter so that we're not causing any unnecessary problems, either harming our horse or an unsafe situation where our halter is too loose and might actually come off of our horse, leading to our horses getting loose and not being tied anymore. When we have a properly fitting halter, the next thing to consider is that our horses are tied the appropriate distance from the wall. There's a short end of things and a long end of things. On the long end of things, we don't want to tie any longer than for our horse's nose to touch the ground. If your horse can move more or put their head completely down without only touching the ground with their nose, it's too long and could become dangerous if your horse gets a foot over the rope. So we want to make sure it's short enough their nose can only touch the ground and no further. On the short end of things, it's all about our horse's comfort. We don't necessarily want to glue our horse's head to the object that we're tying to. We want to make sure that Oakley here, as she moves around, maybe a fly lands on her, maybe she wants to look over at her neighbor. That's all well and good. We want to make sure she can do that and isn't feeling claustrophobic like she's tied really tightly to the wall, because that would be uncomfortable for anyone. And we want to keep our horses nice and comfortable and safe throughout our tacking and grooming process while we're working with them. The third thing to consider is that we're using the appropriate knots. So there are hundreds of different ways of tying quick release knots. I'm going to show you the way that we typically tie things here at the ranch. But honestly, you can go online and look up a whole bunch of different quick release knots. Any of those are going to be just fine. The quick release aspect is so that if something were to happen that our horse gets spooked, or in other words, if we need to remove them from the wall quickly, untie them, we don't want to be fighting against a knot where they're pulling and it's just getting tighter. Because if we tie a normal knot and they pull, it's going to get tighter and tighter and tighter to the point where we might actually have to cut the tack off of our horses in order to get them untied. And we don't want to be in that situation. We don't want to scare our horse in that way. We want to be able to untie them. So the quick release knot that I'm going to show you guys today is called a daisy chain. So right now she's just loosely tied. There's no knot involved. These blocker tie rings, we use just like a loop that we can tie our knot through. So first off, we'll take our lead, decide on how long we want to tie her from the wall. Right now I'm going to tie her up nice and close so that you guys can see. So I'm going to take about 2 feet away from the clip under my horse's jaw and make a little loop just like this. I'm going to take my loop and pass it through the ring or whatever other object you guys are tying your horse to. Pass it through the ring. Then I'm going to take my excess, the tail end that's not attached to my horse, and I'm going to make another loop, which I'm going to stick right through the first. So now I have another loop in my left hand. And I'm going to repeat this process until I get to the end of the loop, or into the lead right here. So I'm going to take my right hand, make another loop, and pass it through the one in my left. And I'm going to keep doing this until I get to the end. When I get to the end and I just have the tail here left, I'm going to pull it all the way through. And so this is what locks that daisy chain in and keeps your more nosy horses from pulling on the end here and untying themselves. This kind of locks it, which means if there was an issue and I really quickly needed to get Oakley here untied, all I'm going to do is take this tail end out and pull, and she's going to come completely untied from the wall. But we don't want to, have her untying herself. Some of your more mouthy horses might get there. So we want to make sure we lock that tail end when we're not standing right next to them and needing to untie them. But otherwise, that quick release knot is going to allow you to work safely around your horses and get them untied when you need to. So there are a number of different places to tie your horse that are going to be safe and effective. We use two main ways here at the ranch, and that's the blocker tie ring and also a tie rail or a tie post. There are two other ways that are very common, and that's to use a tie stall or to use cross ties. We don't have facilities for that here at the ranch, so it's not something that we use often. But if that's what your instructor uses at your facility, please ask them how to use them safely so that you can be safe and effective when working with your horse. I'm going to go through the tie blocker ring here first, because that's definitely our number one way of tying our horses up here at the ranch. What we love about this blocker tie ring here is that it can be adjusted for different levels of horses in terms of where they're at in their training. If you've got a horse that you haven't done a lot of tying work with, maybe they struggle to be tied up or have had a bad experience in the past, which makes them more prone to pulling back or pulling away from what you're tying them to, the tie ring can be a really, really great way to train your horses out of this habit because of this cool little first level of pressure here. So what this does, and how we can set this up, I'll untie Oakley here for a second just to show you, is that if we take our loop of our lead rope here, whatever length we want her tied from the wall, and we put it through the back of our blocker tie ring, this little piece here is magnetic, and we're going to pass it up through the middle so that our lead rope is just looped around it. And when our horse is tied up like this, if she were to pull back, so something scared her for whatever reason she needed to move, and she pulls, it's going to slide right through this. So it is providing resistance. It's not just free pulling through, really easy to pull, but if she were to pull back, it's going to slide through. And that allows your horses, if they're scared of something or they're panicking, to kind of let that anxiety dissipate. They're able to move away from it. They're able to get away from the object of their fear, and they'll start learning not to pull back by using these tie rings. Now, if you've got that horse, and we all have one, that really likes to get away when they're tied up, that Houdini that's always finding a way to untie themselves and go wandering around your facility, you're going to want to use an extra precaution here to make sure that your horse doesn't just leave while you go to fetch your grooming supplies or your saddle. And that's just going to be whatever quick release knot you feel comfortable tying. Here we use the daisy chain, so that's what I'm going to use with Oakley here, but any quick release knot will work. So to daisy chain after this, we're just going to start with our loops and start tying just as we would if we were tying to anything else that wasn't a blocker tie ring here. So we're going to pass it through, lock it in at the end, and then she's secured as if this wasn't a special piece of equipment, just like if you were tying her to a rail or anything like that. And this is definitely the number one way we tie our horses, because we've got horses at all different levels of training, and this is a really nice, safe way to tie them. The other way that we tie our horses here at the ranch is to a fence, so that would be like a tie rail or a tie post. We here only use the vertical parts of our fencing because the horizontal pieces are not as secure, and we wouldn't want to tie her to something that's going to come loose. So this vertical piece here, what we're going to do is double up our lead, just like we did for the blocker tie ring, and pass that behind this vertical piece, make another loop, and start on our daisy chain from there, or any other quick release knot that you want to tie. When we're tying to a fence, we just want to keep in mind again that we're tying to something solid. Don't choose a post that's just barely sunk into the ground. Make sure you really test it and know that it's structurally sound and that your horse isn't going to be able to pull it free. So now let's talk about what not to do. 3 things we don't want to do when tying up our horse are tying below the level of our horse's back, tying up with the reins, or tying to something that our horse could break or move with them. When we're tying at the level of our horse's back or above, that's going to keep our horse from being able to get their leg over the lead rope, which would be a safety concern and could be a real danger to our horse and anyone that happens to be working around it. And when we're thinking about at the level of our horse's back or above, we're thinking about what our horse is actually tied to. So in this case, the blocker tie ring, but also a tie rail, a tie stall, or your cross ties. The second thing that we want to keep in mind is that we don't tie our horses up by the reins. The bridle and the reins are not meant for tying, which means they're not going to be strong enough to withstand our horse pulling if our horse was to spook or try and move around. Those are really intended for riding, and they're meant to break if there's any kind of safety concern. Like if you were to get your rein caught up on something, it's intended to break. So if we were to tie our horses up by the reins, you're looking at 1, you're going to have to buy a new bridle or new reins, and 2, your horse is going to be loose. Thirdly, if you use a bit when you ride, you could really injure the inside of your horse's mouth. So if we have a bridle on, there's a bit, and our horse were to pull back and really pull on that bit, they could cut the insides of their mouth, cut up their tongue, and that's something we really want to avoid, is causing any kind of injury to our horse. The third thing that we really want to avoid when we're tying up our horses is tying to anything that our horses could move or break. So you think about, if you were to tie your horse to something that then when your horse spooked, they pull back and that object keeps following them, you're going to create a really scary situation. A horse that's tied to something and they start running away from it and it just follows them is kind of a snowball effect and a really dangerous situation where your horse is going to get increasingly panicked because the object of their fear is just chasing them, and you're not going to have any way of stopping them because they're now tied to this tie rail or whatever it is that you've tied them to, and you can't catch them and they're running away from it. So we want to make sure, like in this instance, this is anchored into the concrete. Our horse cannot pull this out of the wall. If she were to get spooked and pull back, it would stay here. We wouldn't end up in that dangerous situation. This is increasingly important when you're tying to a rail, because some rails, if they're not properly secured and your horse were to pull back, they're going to pull the rail off of whatever it's attached to, and now you've got a horse tied to a really big rail running around your facility, and that's dangerous. So making sure that what we tie our horses to, being solid and unmovable like this, is very important. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all learned something new about how to tie your horse up safely. Keep your eyes open for more CHA videos coming your way soon, and we'll see y'all later.
If you enjoyed this video, we would love to hear from you. Like and subscribe, and leave us a comment on what you'd like to see in future episodes. We'll see you back at the ranch.